Hello students, welcome to today's lesson. In our previous lesson, we looked at the part 2 of diversity of living things, and then we were given some assignments to try, and I hope we all did that. For today, we are going to look at the part 3 of our topic, diversity of living things, and we'll be focusing on kingdom protester. Let us now look at our lesson objectives for today's lesson. And by the end of today's lesson, you should be able to 1. State the main features of organisms in the kingdom protista. Then 2. You should be able to state all the phyla under this kingdom protista with their main characteristics. Now we shall be looking at 4 main groups of organisms under this kingdom. And the first group we're going to look at are the seaweeds. Then the group number 2, we are going to look at the algae, and they are normally called the plant-like protists. As the name suggests, plant-like, so they have plant-like features. Then the third one we're going to look at is the protozoa, and these ones are the animal-like protists, Examples, we'll be looking at amoeba, look at euglena, look at diatoms, and look at ciliates. So these are some of the protozoas we are going to talk about under the kingdom protista. Now the last group we are going to look at is the slime molds, and these ones are the fungus-like protists, because they have some features that are similar to that of the fungi. So let's note down. Now you must note also that protists are organisms in the kingdom protista. So take note of this. Alright, so let us now look at the main characteristics or the main features of kingdom protista, or the main features of organisms in the kingdom protista. Why are they classified into this kingdom? The very first one is that they are eukaryotic. It means that they have a true nucleus. Now the word "eu" means true, and the word "karyon" means nucleus. So putting the two together, we call it eukaryotic. So note that eukaryotic is a two-part name, Greek name, that is true nucleus. So eu means true, karyon means nucleus. So you add the two together, so true nucleus. Now when you say true nucleus, what does it really mean to say true nucleus? Now there is a nucleus that has nuclear material with nuclear membrane surrounding the material. So let's note the difference. Remember, in our previous lesson, we looked at prokaryotic. It means that these ones, they have a nuclear material with no nuclear membrane, but with these ones, they have a nuclear material with a nuclear membrane. So that's the difference. Then characteristic number 2 is that they are mostly unicellular. And we have only a few ones that are multicellular. When we say unicellular, we are referring to organisms that are single-celled. The whole organism is just a cell, just one cell. So the organism is made up of just a cell, so just one cell. So that's unicellular. So let's take note of that one. When we say multicellular, it means that the organism has several cells, or many cells forms the organism. So let's take note of this one as well. So for protists, most of them are unicellular and a few of them are multicellular. Then feature number 3 is that they have no cell wall. But in the algae, the algae have a cell, but most of them have no cell wall. In exception of the algae, that's the plant-like protist. So let's take note of that one. Then lastly, they reproduce both sexually and then asexually. So that is what they do. So reproduce both sexually and then asexually. We shall be looking deeper into this in our subsequent slides. Now when we take the kingdom protista or protoctista, this kingdom is divided into 9 phyla. We shall be looking at all these 9. So let's take note of this one. The very first phylum under this particular kingdom is phylum Rhizopoda. And we normally call them rhizopods. We have phylum number 2, we call it phylum Zoomastigena. And they are normally called the flagellates. Phylum Zoomastigena. We have phylum Apicomplexa. We call them sporozoans. They are the sporozoans. So let's take note of that one. Then we have the phylum Celiophora. Phylum Celiophora. They are the ciliates. The ciliates. We also have phylum Oomycota. Phylum Oomycota. These ones are normally called the slime molds or the oomycetes. The oomycetes or the slime molds. Let's take note of that one. Then we have number 6, phylum Euglenophyta. Phylum Euglenophyta. We call them euglenoid flagellates. Euglenoid flagellates. Then we have phylum Chlorophyta. Phylum Chlorophyta. So remember chlorophyll. So these ones are the green algae. They are the green algae. And we have phylum Rhodophyta. They are called the red algae. Phylum Rhodophyta. Then last we have phylum Phaeophyta. Phylum Phaeophyta. And they are the brown algae. So these are the 9 phyla under the kingdom Protista. So let's take note of that one. In our subsequent slides, we shall take each of these phyla and then we look deeper into what they entail. Now let us note these 4 key things about the 9 phyla we have just talked about in our previous slide. Now the first 4 phyla are animal-like protists. The first 4 phyla are animal-like protists, and they are referred to as protozoans as the first 4 phyla. So let's take note of that one. The first 4 are animal-like protists, and this is because they are holozoics. It means that they undergo holozoic nutrition. They are heterotrophs that undergo holozoic nutrition. So let's note it. They are animal-like protists because of the fact that they can't prepare their own food, but rather depend on other organisms for their food. And by so doing, they ingest the food. So we call them holozoics. So they ingest food, and the food undergoes digestion inside their body. So they undergo internal digestion. So we call them holozoics. Let's note it. The very second thing we are going to notice is that the 5th phylum, the Oomycota, was first classified under kingdom Fungi. Remember the slime molds were first classified under the kingdom Fungi. Now this is because they undergo saprophytic nutrition. Note that all fungi are saprophytes or saprotrophs. And so initially the phylum Oomycota were classified under the kingdom Fungi because of their feeding habit, that is saprophytic feeding. When it says saprophytic feeding, it refers to a type of heterotrophic feeding whereby the organisms, they undergo extracellular digestion. It means that they don't digest food inside their body, they don't ingest food, or that they digest the food outside their body. They release enzymes onto the food outside their body, and the food is being digested outside their body. So we call them saprophytic feeders or saprotrophs. So let's take note of that one. Now we are going to note the third thing. The 6th phylum we mentioned has both plant-like and animal-like features. They have both plant-like and animal-like features. So when we take organism in a particular phylum, we can note some plant-like features and also note some animal-like features. So let's take note of that one. You can refer back to the previous slide, and then you will see the 5th or the 6th phylum we just spoke of. Then the last note we are going to look at is that the last 3 phyla are plant-like protists. They are plant-like, and that is because they undergo photosynthesis. We call them algae. So we have the green algae, the brown algae, and the red algae. Now they undergo photosynthesis, and so we call them what plant-like protists. So let's take critical note of these 4 key things. Alright, so we are going to take all the 9 phyla you have spoke about earlier and then look at the details of it. The very first one I'm going to discuss is the phylum Rhizopoda. Phylum Rhizopoda. Now this phylum includes organisms such as amoeba, entamoeba, and of course Ascilla. These are some few organisms we can talk about for now. Now we can normally find these organisms in ditches, in ponds, and of course in muddy waters. So let's take note of the habitat of these organisms. Now let's look at the main characteristics or the main features of phylum Rhizopoda. Why are they classified into this phylum Rhizopoda? The very first feature is that they have irregular shape. Their shape is irregular, or you can say they have an amoeboid shape. An amoeboid shape. You can hear the word amoeboid shape. Meaning that shape is not regular, it is irregular. You can't give it any kind of shape. It is irregular shape. Let's take note of that. Number 2 is that they possess pseudopodia for movement. They have pseudopodia for movement. It means that they have their structure that they use to move called pseudopodia. When I say pseudopodia, it's a two-part name. The word pseudo means false, and the word podia means fit. And so when you combine these two words, you call it false fit. False fit. And so that's the structure that the organisms in this particular phylum use for movement. So let's note it. When we say pseudopodium is false foot. That's the singular of this particular one, pseudopodia. So let's get a difference between pseudopodia and pseudopodium. Pseudopodia is false feet, pseudopodium is false foot. So let's take note of that. Then lastly, organisms in this particular phylum, they are all unicellular. They are all unicellular. It means they are all single-celled organisms. So the whole organism is made up of just one cell. Just one cell. So just a single cell forms the whole organism. So these are the characteristics of organisms in the phylum Rhizopoda. Alright, so in your shots now, we have the very first one in the top left corner is the amoeba paramecium. This is amoeba. On your top right corner too, another amoeba is there. So this is amoeba on the top left and right corners. Now we come to the down left corner. Down left corner, you have the entamoeba. The entamoeba is here, and then the down right corner we have the Ascilla. So these are examples of organisms in the phylum Rhizopoda. Now the second phylum we're going to talk about under this kingdom is the phylum Zoomastigena. Phylum Zoomastigena. The examples of organisms in this phylum are the Trypanosoma species. The Trypanosoma species that causes trypanosomiasis. That is the African sleeping sickness. You remember the sleeping sickness? That is the trypanosomiasis. Let's take note of that one. Now we can normally find these organisms in the blood plasma or in the lymph of mammals and some other animals. So that is the habitat of these organisms in the blood plasma and the lymph of mammals or some other animals. Let's take note of this. Now the main characteristics or features of organisms in this phylum are one. Now they are unicellular organisms. They are all unicellular, and you know this means that they are single-celled. So just one cell makes the whole organism. Now number 2 is that they have flagella for movement. So remember the previous one we spoke of, they have pseudopodia for movement, but these ones have what? Flagella for movement. They have flagella for movement. So let's take note of that one. And of course they also have pellicle. They have a pellicle that is found in their cell. They have a pellicle that is found in their cell. One of the characteristics of organisms in this particular phylum. Then lastly, they reproduce by both sexual and asexual means. By both sexual and asexual means. So these are the characteristics of organisms in the phylum Zoomastigena. Remember the Trypanosoma species. Trypanosome, they are organisms that are found in this particular kingdom. Also in this particular phylum. So in your shots now we have the Trypanosoma species. You see the purple organisms you see there. That is the Trypanosoma species. Like we said, they are found in the blood plasma, and so you can see them and they are surrounded by the blood cells over there. That's the Trypanosoma species that causes the trypanosomiasis. That's the purple or the violet organism you can see in your shots. So in your shots now we have some examples of organisms in the phylum Apicomplexa. We have the eukinete, we have the sporozoite, we have the merozoite. These are examples of organisms in the phylum Apicomplexa. Now the next phylum we are going to discuss is the phylum Coelophora. The phylum Coelophora. We can talk about Paramecium, Chordatum here, the Vorticella, and then the Didynum. These are some organisms that can be found in the phylum Coelophora. Now they are found normally in freshwater and also in marine water habitat. So they are aquatic. They are aquatic. So in freshwater and also in marine water habitats. Now the main features of organisms in this particular phylum are, number one is that they have cilia for movement. They have cilia for movement. So instead of having pseudopodia or flagella, these ones have what? Cilia for movement. So this one is characterized by their name, Ciliophora. Ciliophora. So they have cilia for movement. Number two is that they have two nuclei. They have two nuclei in their cell. You will see two nuclei. Two nuclei. Now we have the macronucleus and we have the micronucleus. These are two nuclei that can be found within the cells of organisms in the phylum Ciliophora. Now also they have pellicle. They have a pellicle that is surrounding their cells as well. They have a pellicle that is found surrounding their cells. So let's take note of that. Then they also defend themselves by a structure called a trichosis. So they have a structure called a trichosis that is found in their cells, and they use the trichosis to defend themselves. So when there is any danger, they use the trichosis to defend themselves. So let's take note of this. So we have the Paramecium chordatum, we have the Vorticella, we have the Didynum. These are some organisms under the phylum Ciliophora. So let's take note of that. Alright, so in your shorts now, we have the very first one on your far left. We have the Paramecium chordatum. Paramecium chordatum. Then we have the middle one, that's the Vorticella. The Vorticella. Then lastly, on your right side, we have the Didynum. So these are examples of organisms in this particular phylum. And now the next phylum I'm going to discuss is the phylum Oomycota. Phylum Oomycota. Now this one we can talk about they've been found in wetlands and also in damp areas. This is the habitat of the organisms that are found in the phylum Oomycota. Let's note this. Now we're going to look at the main features or characteristics of organisms in this particular phylum. Now they are non-septic. They are non-septic. When you say they are non-septic, what does it mean? Now this means that they have a hyphae. They have a hyphae that has no cross walls. So their hyphae has no cross walls. So there are no walls that are found within their hyphae. Let's note this. So they are non-septic. So let's take note of this. Number two is that they have spores. So they produce spores, which are biflagellates. For asexual reproduction. It means that they can reproduce by asexual means. So they have spores which are biflagellates. And when I say biflagellate, it means that they're having two flagella, and that is the meaning of biflagellates. And this helps them in reproducing asexually. Now, the third one is that they have no cell wall. These ones have no cell wall. They possess no cell wall. Let's note this. Then lastly, they also reproduce by sexual means. It means that they can also reproduce when there are two parents, a male and a female. So let's note. So it means that they can reproduce both sexually and asexually. Let's take note of the characteristics of organisms in the phylum Oomycota. Now let's look at some examples of organisms in the phylum Oomycota. The very first example we're going to look at is the Phytophthora palmivora. And this is the organism that causes the black pod disease in cocoa. It causes the black pod disease in cocoa. Another one too is the Peronospora. And there is a parasite of various flowering plants. The parasite of a lot of flowering plants. Let's note it. Then the last one I'm going to look at is the Phytophthora infestans. And this causes damping of seedlings. Now these are some examples of organisms in the phylum Oomycota. Yeah, so in your shorts now, the very first one we can see on the top left corner is the Phytophthora palmivora. That is the organism that causes the black pod disease in cocoa. So as you can see in your shot, there are cocoa pods there, and you can see the black pod disease that is affecting the cocoas. So you come to your top left, your top right corner to that is the actual organism that causes the black pod disease. That is the Phytophthora palmivora. When you come down, you could see the down left corner. We can have what we call the Phytophthora infestans also there. That's the down ones. This is affecting the leaves of some flowering plants. So let's take note of this one. Now we are to note, however, that members of phylum Oomycota are commonly known as slime molds. So when you enter here the word slime molds, then remember that they are organisms under the phylum Oomycota. You refer to them as the slime mold. So let's note it. And remember that they were once classified under kingdom fungi because of their saprophytic abilities. So let's note it. But now they are no longer under the kingdom fungi. They are under the kingdom protista. Under the kingdom protista. So let's note these two key points. Now the very last phylum we are going to discuss for today is the phylum Euglenophyta. Phylum Euglenophyta. A very good example of organism under this phylum is the Euglena viridis. The Euglena viridis. Now they are normally found in freshwater and also in marine water habitats. So they are aquatic organisms. They are aquatic organisms. So let's take note of these. Now they have several characteristics, which I'll discuss a few of them. The very first I'm going to discuss is that they possess flagellum for movement. So they have flagella or flagellum that they use to move. So let's take note of that. Then they also mostly are photosynthetic, but a few ones are non-photosynthetic. It means that most of them can manufacture their own food by the process of photosynthesis, but a few ones cannot undergo photosynthesis. Now the third one is that they store food in their paramylum granules for survival during long periods of starvation. So when there are harsh conditions, when there is no food available, then they store food in their granules, the paramylum granules to be specific, and then they fall on this food when there is starvation for a very long period of time. Then lastly, they have a body tapering at one end. They have a body tapering at one end, that is the posterior end, and then blunt at the other end, that's the anterior end. So let's take note of this one. Alright, so we note that Euglena too, of course, they have both plant-like and animal-like features. They have both plant-like and animal-like features. So let's take critical note of this one. So if we pick what we have in our shots now, this is the Euglena viridis, and that's the very last one I'm going to talk about. That's in the phylum Euglenophyta. So let's take note of this one. So you could see that it has flagellum. If you look very close to the image, you could see that there are some green pigments over there, and this tells you that it has both plant-like and animal-like features. You can see chloroplast, you can see flagellum. You can even see reservoir like a mouth part, and this tells you that it has both plant-like and animal-like features. So all too soon you have come to the end of today's lesson, and I hope you have learned a lot. I want to urge you all to take this lesson very seriously. Go back to your notes and revise. So here are some few assignments for you to try. So you have to do this and submit tomorrow by 12 noon. Tomorrow by 12 noon. You have to state 3 characteristics of organisms in the kingdom Protista. Number 2, you have to list the 9 phyla under the kingdom Protista. All the 9 phyla, you have to list all the 9 phyla. Then the very last question is that you have to state 3 features each of 3 of the phyla you have listed above. So state 3 features each of 3 of the 9 phyla you have listed above. So just take 3 of the phyla and then give me 3 characteristics each of these 3 phyla. Thank you very much. Have a nice day. Bye bye.